Welcome to the Health Fix podcast, where health junkies get their weekly fix of tips, tools, and techniques to have limitless energy, sharp minds, and fit physiques for life. On this episode of the Health Fix podcast, I'm interviewing Hannah Powley again. And Hannah's a kinesiologist, a fascial stretch therapist, master level Reiki practitioner, breath worker, and a fitness coach. Now, she likes to combine all of her learned techniques to really create a unique way of working with her clients. And today we're going to be talking about how she uses fascial stretch therapy in her practice, but also what it's all about. Like, what is fascia? Why do we want to pay attention to it? And how does it like to hold on to our emotions? All right, let's get you into the podcast. Health junkies. Here we are with another episode of the Health Fix podcast. And I have Hannah Powley back on because we are going to be talking about probably one of the areas that I think is way overlooked in the medical world, but also for its value in just helping us to release trauma in the body. So we're going to be talking about fascial work today, and we're going to be talking about the ins and outs of it. And I'm going to even share a little personal story of an aha moment that I had with it. So Hannah, welcome back to the Health Fix podcast.
Thanks, Jannine. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm really happy to speak on this topic. It's so close to my heart. So really excited.
Mine too, literally. And we'll get to that here in a second. But fascial tissue, for those of you guys who are just joining in and wondering, like, what in the heck does this have to do with anything? It's a wrapping around our body, and it can get really stuck. And some folks will say sticky, and some folks will say that you can break apart fascial tissue. And I hate that word because one, you're not breaking any tissue, and two, it's the whole wrong approach. So Hannah, we were just talking about this in terms of gentle and seeming like at first, sometimes it feels like you're not doing anything and people are like, what in the world are you doing with my body here? So let's talk a little bit about your fascial tissue training, how you were drawn to it, and then we'll get into some details.
Yeah, I initially came across fascia when I was a personal trainer about 6 years ago. And I was working with an amputee. Mm-hmm. He had been crushed in a heavy operating accident, and he had a steering wheel in his stomach and ended up losing his leg. And there was lots and lots happening there in terms of sensitivities and blood flow and that type of thing. And I found that my lens that I was working from in terms of just strength training was kind of limiting in working with him. So I decided to take the Stretch to Win fascial stretch therapy certification. And that was, about 6 years ago now. And that certification, that training completely changed the trajectory of my life without really realizing it, in terms of the lens that I could start to see people's bodies through. So I started implementing that as best I could in the big box gym setting, as much as it was tolerated, in that demographic of people. Typically, I started working on, outside of my personal clients, I started having bodybuilders book in for sessions with me. Because there is such a relationship between posture and fascia. Fascia is the container for our posture. So bodybuilders that were doing competitions and had to really hold those perfect positions for a long period of time would come and see me for fascial work for their competitions. And that was kind of a cool space to be in for a while. And then I started to lean a bit more towards the rehabilitation space with my background in kinesiology and then now this understanding of fascia. It was cool to combine my fascial work with strengthening. So I found myself working a lot with people that had maybe just had like a fusion in their lower back or big birth trauma. That kind of thing where they needed a combination of working the fascial system, opening things up, and also strengthening as well, because they complement each other in such a beautiful way. So that's kind of what got me into fascial work. And now I'm still in the same space, doing a little bit more body work than I am training. But now I do complement the fascial work with certain clients with an at-home strengthening program. So it's a fun way that I've integrated both of them together.
I like that. I like that because I mean, ultimately, the fascial work has to do with how we move and
Mhm.
how we get set in certain patterns. And I think I have somewhat of a good explanation in turn, or not a demo for folks, and we can talk through this one step at a time. Like some years ago, about I was thinking 4 or 5 years ago, I was doing a lot of CrossFit. I was doing a lot of clean and jerks and a lot of snatches. And I started to notice that my left shoulder wanted to turn in on itself all the time. And so I would do pec stretches and I would do lat stretches and I would do like the smashing. And then we did the banding, things like the blood flow restriction stuff and all that. But nothing seemed to really get rid of it. What might you think underneath all that is bound up, which ends up being, of course, right, the fascial tissue. And so we were talking a little bit before we jumped on about that particular area, and we can get into that in a minute. But I think for folks who are listening, they may be like, yeah, I do the mobility work, yeah, I do certain things, but I don't feel like it ever fully releases. Would you say that that has to do with the fascial work, kind of the fascial tissue getting just still gunked up and not gliding like it should?
Yeah, there are so many things coming up for me here that we can dive into. I think the first thing is to I'd love to invite, everyone listening to maybe be able to hold a perspective that is not singular. So a nuanced perspective on things, right? So
Mm-hmm.
perhaps it's not just muscular or it's just fascial. Um, there are so many connections that happen when we find ourselves in a space of pain
Mm-hmm.
and chronic tension. There are so many things happening. So it's so hard to, pinpoint one thing. And I think that idea and letting go of, not being able to pinpoint can be quite hard for some people when we live in a world that is very like symptomatic and tunnel vision type of approach. So I think the first thing is being able to hold um, or be open to the idea that there are so many little connections happening. And really, what our job is as practitioners, and also our job as being people in a human body, is to be able to be open to all of those messages that are coming through. And specifically with fascia, I mean, um, fascia wraps everything in our body, like you said. So it wraps our nerves, it wraps our organs, it wraps our muscles. So when we have constriction or restriction or adhesion in that fascia, that is going to directly affect every single tissue in our body. So blood flow is going to be affected, lymph flow is going to be affected, posture is going to be affected. So it it does make sense, as someone like yourself that has explored quite a few different techniques and the problem is still presenting, that fascia could definitely be one of those routes, as well as, I'd be curious about what your emotional climate looked like a
Yeah.
couple years ago when that pattern started to present itself in your body.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, folks, we're talking about the left side of my shoulder, right? So your heart's right there. And in Chinese medicine wise, that's the heart channel acupuncture area. And it's also the pericardium, which is kind of that sac that the heart sits in. That channel comes across into the area that I have pain. And yes, about that time, and I think I'm kind of even at 5 or 6 years, I'm probably almost right about 5.5, 6 years, if I think about it like harder. And that was right when I owned a spa in Tacoma, and I was switching from that business to going to out on my own. And it was kind of like that transition. And so I'm thinking I've got some loss, I've got some trauma about my relationship with the partner that I had in that business, and we had a lot, there's a lot that went down. So I'm like, okay, I can see some stuff there for sure.
Yeah, that's so important to be able to reflect on. And one of the questions that I ask for sure, when I'm beginning to work with someone, and also like childhood as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think childhood is an important thing to reflect on when it comes to, you mentioned like a traumatic or a sensitive, stressful season of life. I think all of these things are so important to be able to hold and make space for. And when you think about it, when you reflect on that time, um, what our body really requires and what on a cellular level our fascia requires is space. And there's a really beautiful reflection in that, in terms of, when fascial tension started in our body, when we started to develop that like body armor, maybe in that left shoulder, what we weren't getting was space, right?
Mm-hmm.
What we require to have a functioning fascial system is space in all of the areas. So um, there's a really beautiful kind of mirror there, in terms of maybe, where in your life were you not receiving space, whether it was that like relationship with your business partner, or it was the stress of navigating those changes. There's a really cool reflection back and forth there between the body and the emotions. And those patterns can definitely show up as that like armoring of the body.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I mean, I think about the armoring and I go, there's some other even connections, and maybe even folks can tie this into as well, shoulder pain and hip pain, because we have this crisscross of tissue that wraps us kind of like in an X in the, like right shoulder to left hip, and then the left shoulder to the right hip. And I also have right SI joint issues that are chronic. So what kind of things might you be able to say about that?
Yeah, I love that you're bringing that up. I think it's a lens that not many people look through. And I think that's really important. And the way I like to think about it, the analogy I like to use with my clients is, if you think of your fascia like you see a big spider web on a tree, or you see a big spider web in the corner of your house. And if you just poke that spider web, the whole spider web moves and shakes. And if you pull one side of the spider web, the whole spider web will move with it. And that's a really great metaphor to understand the fascial system. If we are restricted in our right SI joint, that's absolutely going to pull on the left shoulder. And all of these other small spaces where that fascial system is connected. There's a really great video online. If you just go onto YouTube and search what is fascia, it's one of the first videos that pops up, and it's this man standing in a fascial skin bodysuit. And there's a woman describing fascia, and what she's doing is she's pulling on his bodysuit in different places and showing that like relationship between all of the fascia. So like I said, it's so important to be able to understand that all of these things work as one. And our left shoulder is not separate from our right hip.
Yeah. Yeah. They're absolutely connected in that way. And I think, a lot of people maybe have started to connect that, but the fascial tissue is really something that I think is a mystery still, in terms of like, when I've gone to, or not myself, but let's put this, when I've recommended folks to have fascial work done, they're like, it seemed like nothing was happening. They were just like pulling taffy on me. And I was like, exactly. It's like that. Can you describe a little bit of like what a session looks like for folks, so they can kind of get a little sense of like, okay, what the heck, if we're opening up left shoulder and right hip, what might that look like in terms of what you might do?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely have heard that description before, that you just mentioned about like, oh, it doesn't really feel like they're doing very much. And one of the biggest things with fascial work is one of our biggest principles is to stay within the window of tolerance, which may be a little bit different than, that deep tissue massage that you receive when you're breathing really heavy and you're kind of tensing up more. But it's kind of good, but you're tense. It's going to look very different than, that type of experience, because we stay within the window of tolerance. And what the window of tolerance is, what space can we explore where the nervous system can stay in a somewhat regulated state. So in my training, one of the biggest teachings was how to feel and respond to the tissue. So really being able to feel like, okay, is there jumpiness starting to happen here? Okay, maybe we back off a little bit. Or is there armoring happening? Maybe we back off a little bit. So to answer your question in terms of how I would go about that, whether no matter what symptoms are presenting for new clients that come to see me, whether it's, one shoulder, or whether it's neck tension or plantar fasciitis, I will never start by addressing that specific area. The reason being is related to this window of tolerance. We want to really be able to build safety within the body. And no matter what symptom someone's coming in with, I will always start with a full body session. So we will start to open up a little bit of each area of the body in a very staying, kind of surface level, and really integrating the breath. Most of our society, forgets to breathe a lot of the time. So having someone come lay down and tune in and get into the breath to create that safety and space within the body, and then moving through the entire body and kind of using that as my first assessment. I've never really been one I don't really enjoy the whole dynamic of, having someone come in and then me telling them what's wrong with them for 20 minutes and then we move into the session. I really use that first session as kind of an assessment, especially because, a big part of the practice is feeling and responding to the tissue. So if I was looking at someone like yourself, I would start there. I would also probably spend a little bit more time on the opposite side of the body to create that mirroring of safety. So, maybe I would start with the right shoulder, or I would start with the left hip, so that we can create that feeling of regulation and safety and openness, so that when we go to those problematic areas, you've already had that experience on the other side.
That makes sense. And the fact that you bring up the safety component, I think, is really, really huge, because I'm in the camp lately of being really convinced that most of us have issues. I can tie back most issues in life to the stress of not feeling safe. I really can. And if I look at it and across the spectrum, it could be IBS, not feeling safe, gut feelings. And I know there's a ton of fascial work that we could do for the abdomen alone. We had just talked about moms and post-baby kind of stuff, but also just that whole sense of safety, because the heart and the breast area, this is a sensitive area in Chinese medicine. Even in my practice to this day, I'm not going to go right after someone's armpit or breast points my first time I meet them, because we can unlock a whole bunch of emotions. So tell us a little bit about that safety component and why the fascial tissue has so much to do with safety and the nerves that are in there and all that stuff. Give us the breakdown there.
Yeah, I think safety really starts, before the session even begins. Within my intake form, I really ask questions that kind of set the scene, in terms of, what this is going to look like is I'm going to ask you some questions that have you reflecting a little bit on things just outside of those physical symptoms so that me receiving that information before we even get into the session, the client understands that that's, kind of what this container of work will look like. And when they arrive, I greet them at the door and I'm excited to see them and I make eye contact and I bring them up to the space and I talk about the space and I talk about, what the session's going to look like. I think so much of safety starts before we actually get onto the table. And as a practitioner, making sure that I am safe. I am safe in my own body. I am grounded. I'm taking care of myself and, all those types of things that go into the way that we relate to each other, and the way that the client feels when they're around me. In addition to that, safety within the fascia, like I said, it's taking things layer by layer, not trying to, like you said, with the heart line, like you're not just going to go straight into the heart line on someone's first session because that can open up a whole can of worms that, not that you can't, hold space for that, but that's not necessarily what your intention is. So, for me, it's like the breath is the biggest thing with creating that space of safety. Especially because, like I said, we forget to breathe a lot of the time. And like I said as well, fascia requires space. So a lot of people are coming in to see me with a lack of space, whether that be in their lives or in their bodies, and really being able to set the tone to create space within the mind and within the body. Yeah, it's funny because I feel like I'm answering things in a similar kind of way. Because that, like, the set and the setting is just so crucial for our bodies to be able to open. Yeah.
Absolutely, because most of us have been stuck in certain patterns for a long time, and whether you've had little traumas or big traumas or multiple, littles or multiple bigs kind of built together, your body is a sensing being. And it's kind of like that feeling, like those of you who are listening, if you went in to go get massage and that person that was touching you, it just didn't feel right. It's because their energy's off and your energy is like, I don't want this. It's almost like when you dread to go get a deep tissue massage because that pressure is just too much. And like, you have the ability to tell people to lighten up. But I think there's still this but I need it to be deeper to get an effect. Let's talk about that for a second, because a lot of us are in that camp of must hurt, must be deep, must be like this to get an effect. But that isn't necessarily what's going to tell that's going to allow our nervous system to relax. Because so many times I've been in a massage and I feel like I left tighter than I went in. And I think a lot of people tell me, I know a lot of people will tell me this.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that phenomenon.
Yeah, attachment to the outcome, right? Like, I'm attached to this specific outcome because I've received, these messages from wherever all around me that, I think it kind of goes back to that conversation we had in our previous podcast about that, like, go hard or go home mentality. And when it comes to the body and it comes to body armor and years of patterns of tension, the go hard or go home strategy doesn't work here. When we're starting to unravel the tissue, we're unraveling so many other things outside of just the physical tissue. And you mentioned, like patterns, years of patterns regarding stress and holding things in. The body and the brain work together, in terms of moving and relieving stress. When we experience emotional stress, we have kind of two ways of relieving that. One is chemical processing through the brain, and then the other is to move that tension or store that tension into the body. So when we're unraveling the fascia, we need to be careful with that go hard or go home approach, because we can be opening up, like you said, a whole can of worms. Perhaps maybe it's unprocessed grief or unprocessed anger, or those types of things that we're storing within our bodies. So it's important to be able to move in and out of those approaches and what feels right. And I think when we're talking about the muscular system, that's very different.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people right now might be thinking, like, how can we store things in our tissue? Like, how does that really work? Because I've had people question me quite a bit, and of course I go back to the fight or flight nervous system and the little fibers that are in the fascial tissue. But I would love for you to share with us about what you say to people when people ask you what is happening, how can this even be possible that I'm storing my trauma in my body?
Yeah, for sure. There's a couple different ways that we can go about this. One of them is the way that we present our posture. So there's a direct relationship between our emotions and our temperature and our posture. If we're experiencing, I mean, we could even do this right now, Jannine. Like we could close our eyes and take a breath, and we could tune into the feeling of gratitude and just notice, how our bodies respond. For me, my heart feels more open, my head feels like it's getting taller. I'm feeling my feet on the ground. And if I tune into the feeling of anger, I immediately felt my shoulders lift and come forward. And I'm immediately feeling most of my awareness is in the top of my head. So, just a quick, simple practice like that can show you that there is a relationship between those emotions that we feel and the way our body responds. That's a really great example. And, for example, let's take grief again. An emotion or a feeling of grief, if it's not given space, it has to go somewhere. And if we're not, especially if we're sedentary, if we don't move very often, we aren't really giving our bodies the opportunity to move and release that energy. And that brings me to, we could even look at this from a scientific perspective. The amygdala in the brain, which is responsible for the fear response. The amygdala for us operates a lot of what we do in this society that we live in. Take even, for example, just having a hard conversation with your loved one, with your partner. Your breathing starts to get rapid, your chest starts to get tight. That amygdala in the brain is responsible for that fear response. So if we do certain movements, like, for example, walking, we are able to move some of those feelings and some of that chemical processing from the amygdala into the brain cortex, where we're able to actually chemically process these emotions and stresses. So movement is a really big piece of this. If you are not moving your body and you're listening to this and you're like, well, I don't really understand, it's likely because you aren't experiencing that feeling of, processing things through movement. And that example, walking, it's called bilateral cross crawl, which is really effective for that brain processing. So it could be cross country skiing, or it could be doing dead bugs on the floor, or it could be doing, it could be running, could be crawling. those types of movements are really helpful. And that's kind of the more scientific lens that we could look through.
Ooh, you know me, I love the geeking out, and especially on the cross country and cross country skiing, one of my favorite things, but just the cross country
Mm-hmm.
of the body as a
Mm-hmm.
whole. Super cool
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So, geeking out a little bit more, I want to talk about the abdomen because so many women, I believe, hold stuff there. Like, if it's not constipation, because I find that like there has to be more to constipation than just functional stuff, especially as we get older. Because I feel like we hold and lock down, just like you were saying, not feeling safe. And then the whole bloating thing, too, because I have done so many different gut repair protocols, so many different like bug kill protocols with all kinds of herbs to the point where it's just like some people do not get results after multiple things. And I'm like, it has to be tissue related and like safety related.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so much we could speak to on this. I agree with you. I was one of those people that tried um, all of the different approaches in terms of, like purchasing this product, using this herb, using this adaptogenic supplement. And the biggest thing that I needed to do, I personally had a I experienced a trauma that was related to my pelvic area and my abdomen. And for me, it was really making space to feel those feelings, as scary as they were, and make space for those parts of myself, those voices that got really loud from that experience, and also to create safety within my body. So,
Mhm.
we talked about on our last podcast, like slower flow, like movement and that sort of thing. So, I have my own experience, with what you mentioned, and um, trying all of those different, like more functional approaches, but them not really working and spending so much money and kind of um, feeling really defeated until I really made space for those parts of myself that were connected to that experience. And, you don't have to have like a big traumatic experience for this to be
Mhm.
true for you. If you're listening, this could be true for you, even if you have sucked in your stomach your whole life.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree. I mean, my mom taught me when I was a kid to suck in my stomach. And I feel like that, like she was just trying to, teach you to be a lady, but it did. I feel I even get like below my rib cage, sometimes I'll get spasms there where like I go to get out of a chair and it's like, whoa, whoa, like literally have to like flop myself onto like an ottoman or like my stability ball and like open it up. And I think that's common for a lot of women. I know I'm not alone on that. And like as you explained too, like I think this is a woman thing. I really do think it's a chick thing. I mean, I think guys do too, but I think for women in
Yeah.
particular, we do stuff a lot down.
Yeah, I mean, if we can go there, I think a lot of that influence is that patriarchal influence. And when I say patriarchal, what I mean is the feeling of being repressed in certain ways, whether it's our sexuality or it's the way that we tried to control our weight to fit a certain marketing ad that likely, probably, if you follow it all the way up, was not initiated by women. um,
Sure.
and all of these things that we do to please men or to act a certain way. I think my personal belief and my personal experience has been like unraveling some of that, as a woman. Like, where did I start to form these patterns? Where did they come from?
Mhm.
Like making myself small or holding in my stomach or um, controlling my weight or being nice.
Yeah.
Those types of things. And with what you mentioned about like having to lay over a Bosu ball and open up that area, for some, that can be quite scary. Because I think when we feel like, for example, a spasm, if we're not familiar with our bodies and we're not familiar with like the wisdom of our bodies and how to respond to those symptoms, we just freeze and we create more and more tension. So we come more and more into that protective position. And what I see as well with a lot of women on my table is most, if not all of the women I work with have more front body tension. Mm-hmm. And most of the men that I work with tend to have more back body tension, which is a really interesting pattern that I've been seeing, because if you think about it, there's, you know, the idea of safety with the front body, being seen, protecting ourselves. I think those patterns can really show up for women in the society that we live in, and the way that we grew up, you know, like you mentioned with, even though our mothers did everything they could with their education and experience, I think a lot of that influence of maybe telling you to suck in your stomach when you're a kid wasn't your mom's influence, right? It came from somewhere else. So it's a really interesting topic to get into for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, gosh, you know, if you think back, like the corsets and all this, I mean, even back to like the 1500s of women like tying themselves in these dresses and stuff. I mean, it is like, this is a long-standing issue.
Would you say, Jannine, that in your practice, digestive issues present more in women than in men? Or is it equal?
I would say equal, but different presentations. Women, it's lower, like it's large intestine, it's intestines. Guys tend to have more of the burpy stomach and the ulcers and that kind of stuff. Not saying that women don't, but as a whole, if I took like the percentages, it's more deeper gut stuff in the women, and the guys have more like stomach or hemorrhoid. There's like two ends, like they take the two ends and we just take the whole middle. It seems like if I break it down, like, of course there's exceptions, but really, if I look at it as a whole, women are more intestinally jacked. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I'm so interested by that. That's why I wanted to ask that question. And if I think about what you just said about corsets and, you know, holding our stomach in, that makes sense in terms of those like intestinal patterns that show up. And something that we talk about a lot in at our office space, we hold women's circles, and we talk a lot about this type of stuff and what we've inherited, you know, through generations. And I don't know if you heard of the rat cherry blossom study, but it's a really cool way to understand epigenetics and how the fear response can be passed down through generations. They had rats smell cherry blossoms and then shocked them after they smelt the cherry blossoms. And what they found was that fear response that was created through the smelling the cherry blossoms and the shocking was actually passed down when they bred the rats into the children without the children ever experiencing that. So it's a really great example of, you know, how those experiences, you know, no one really wears corsets anymore. But if we look back at the way that we squeezed tight into those things and, you know, all of those other behavioral patterns that we had, that for sure has been passed down and is held in our bodies as women. And it makes so much sense.
It does. It does. And I think a lot of people don't know about this passing down of generational trauma. You know, unless you've seen a trauma therapist, maybe you've heard about it, or you've been like, yeah, well, I don't know. There's no way. But I think our fascia, I mean, what we're made of, right? Our DNA, what goes into the creation of us. I mean, if we go back to embryology and we go back to how do we create tissue? it's very fascinating as to how what's on the outside is a reflection of what's on the inside, because we form as like a tube. So, it's, I don't know. I really think that we do have these huge connections that should be explored. Now, when you're on the table with someone and you're working with someone, I mean, obviously you have an intake, like you said beforehand, so you know a lot of what's going on. Then you're working with them on the table and you're getting into things there. Let's talk a little bit about emotional releases and things of that nature, because I think a lot of people are like, oh God, I don't want to cry in front of anybody. I don't want to have like a negative experience. I don't want to feel the feels. And that's where we need to kind of, let's put it this way, address it ahead of time. I'll have you speak on that.
Yeah, I think that goes back to, what I mentioned about creating safety before they're even on the table. So, one of the things I say to my clients is, this is a completely safe space and supported space, and I'd really love to invite you, if it feels right, to welcome in those emotions and welcome in those feelings and bring them a little bit closer. And sometimes that can mean bodily functions, or sometimes that can mean reactions, emotional reactions like laughter or tears or tremoring, or those types of things. And it's not very common that they happen, but if they do need to happen, creating an invitation for that, and what will be will be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's just being open, being open-minded when you go in. And this is one of the things that I encourage everybody that's listening right now. If you're like thinking, well, maybe this could be really helpful, but I'm super nervous about what's going to happen, what might, I be triggered into. So maybe we should think about contraindications or something, even before coming in to meet with you. What are some of the contraindications that you tell folks about this?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think something I look for sure, in terms of people desiring to get a lot out of the sessions, is what does your life look like outside of the sessions? Do you have a relatively stable life in terms of like your job or your home environment or that type of thing? Do you have someone that maybe you could in your life that maybe you could talk to about your experience if it comes up, outside of me, that is safe and can meet you in that conversation? Because I think, and when I talk about this, I'm not saying that this type of thing happens in every session. That's not necessarily it. We want to be open to, if it needs to happen, making space for that. But even with, if we don't have a deep, profound experience, it's still good to be able to integrate those things with people in your life. And when I say integrate, what I mean is taking that experience and pulling parts of it into your daily life. Because otherwise you just come to see me every 2 weeks and it's just an experience, and then you go back to whatever you're going back to. So how can I integrate this? Maybe my integration is I'm going to start doing 2 or 3 minutes of breathing in the morning, because I notice that I never breathe, and whenever I'm on the table with Hannah, she's always reminding me to breathe. So that's going to be my integration. Or I'm going to go out for a walk and just like give myself that space without my phone to reflect a bit more on what's got me feeling stressed out, or reflect on my day, or do some gratitude and things like that. So that integration is super key as well, which is something that I, in like the consent conversation at the beginning, I talk to clients a lot about that.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that, like you mentioned, that yes, something may come up or it might not, but the most important thing is, I think, the work outside of what you've started. like you said. And this is why I love creating programs around things of this nature, because now we have the mind body spirit part, and this is what's killing me right now of not being able, and why I still go back to Tacoma is because I want to keep that going. So in between I've got folks working on their integrations. But I think the other part of it is how you're translating it, or mixing it with movement and fitness. So tell us a little bit about how you're melding the two practices together for folks to get the most out of what you're doing.
Yeah, it's kind of goes back to the mobility, stability lens, right? We don't want to create so much space, so much mobility, so much fluidity that we lose stability in the body. And that's why I have the two kind of integrated for people that it works for. If people have, no background on resistance training or how to learn how to contract their core and their glutes and that type of thing, very often having a program to go along with your sessions can be really supportive. So, if we're working on opening up the front body, are we also working on strengthening the back body and the posterior train to be able to hold you upright, to be able to open up your front body? So all of those things really go well together. And what it looks like for me is typically I'll do 2 sessions a month, 2 fascial work sessions a month, and then I'll have the client do either an at-home or in the gym program that I've created specifically for them based on what I've seen in our sessions. And doing the 2 sessions a month can be a really great way to check in on, sometimes the hardest thing with doing a workout plan is to be accountable to it. A workout plan, in an online space or on your own. So that accountability piece is really good too. And even if people are, not in my area, I still, can make that work in terms of doing specific mobility sessions on Zoom where we're opening up the fascia, or doing breath work or that type of thing in conjunction with a program. So yeah, they work really well together, and one can't exist without the other. So
No, I feel like it's true. We need more balance of things, the strength and the mobility, the fluidity.
mm-hmm.
But as we get older, I feel like things just start to collect. And this is where it really we should be doing it when we're younger, but as we get older, then, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh crap, things are
Mm-hmm.
collecting now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that I think is almost necessary when you get older. But I even would encourage anyone who's younger in their 30s that's listening to this, I'm 40 plus, but I think a lot of the 30-year-olds, it's time to start thinking about it, because
Mm-hmm.
by the time you get older, you're more locked up. I mean, one of the biggest things that I wanted to mention before we close off today is, like, yes, I talked about the stomach, but I talked about my shoulder, and shoulders for women
Mm-hmm.
are a huge area that can be prone to frozen shoulder. And this is one of the things. Why do frozen shoulders attack women? Yes, we drop in our estrogen levels, and estradiol in particular, and that's common. But what is the other reason? I think it has to do with the holding and the same components we were talking about today. Have you
Mm-hmm.
seen some frozen shoulders?
Yeah, I have seen some frozen shoulders, and I have seen them. If I reflect right now, it's typically women over 40.
Mm-hmm.
And it's typically women that don't know how to slow down. And I say that with, all of the love in my heart for those women. But typically women that are higher stress, very high stress, having issues with sleep, having issues with slowing down. Typically, now that I'm really reflecting, it's also very like successful women in the business space too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, the body's gonna like give you all the signals to slow down, and then finally it's like, all right, I'm gonna make you not be able to move your arm.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
this is what I'm worried about with this thing here.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, if it gets, worse, then I got, that's what I'm like wondering if that's what's going to go to. So I'm like, okay, shoulder folks, I'm going to lead by example and get to working on this thing so I don't have a frozen shoulder. But it's a thing.
Yeah.
It is a thing. So Hannah, let's tell folks about if they're like thinking, okay, I want to try to find somebody to help me out with some fascial work. I'm not really sure how to dive in. I'm not really sure how to find someone. Tell us where they can find you, but also if they're not in Calgary, where could they find someone and how, like, what's the best like mode of finding someone that's going to suit you?
Yeah, so if you're in the Calgary or surrounding area, I have clients that travel to come see me as well when they stop in on their journeys. But if you're in Calgary, you can just find me through here at Lift with Hannah is my Instagram handle. And you can book with me that way. Whether it's just for a singular session or if it's for a hybrid program, like we talked about, my stretch and strengthen program is where we do the 2 sessions of fascial work a month plus a program, a movement program. If you are outside of Calgary and you're looking for a fascial stretch therapist, you can actually go to the Stretch to Win website, stretchtowin.com, and they have a directory on there. So in the directory, you can look up your area, whether it's in the States or in Canada. You can look up your area and take a look, take a browse at the profiles and see who feels right for you. And if you are unable to find anyone in your area, I do work with people on Zoom, specifically with, fascial focused stretching on your own. So you can always reach out to me in regards to that as well as breath work. So.
Awesome. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, we want to have folks making sure they feel comfortable, good space, good environment, welcoming environment. I tend to look at the environment as being one that I want that's peaceful. Some of the stuff within gyms, having worked within a gym myself, the music just too much. It was like dance party and I couldn't focus to work on folks really well. And so, I guess everyone's got to know their own boundaries and in what calms them, I guess, as a whole. So definitely, I'm sure you would agree with me, making sure that the space that you're in feels calming and welcoming.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I'm really glad you brought that up. It's really what you're looking for sure. So yeah, making sure that environment matches what your intention is.
Absolutely. Well, Hannah, thanks again for chatting with me. I hope folks got a lot out of this one as well. Hannah will be on for more. We're going to go through all kinds of other things as time goes on. So thanks again for coming on. And guys, go to liftwithhannah.com. You can find her on Instagram, also Lift with Hannah. And we'll have everything in the show notes at drjkrauseND.com. Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Hey, fellow health junkie, thanks for listening to the Health Fix podcast. If you enjoyed tuning in, please help support me to get the word out about the podcast. Subscribe, rate, and review, and just get that word out. Thanks again for listening.